Hi miteinander. This is the last installment of my series about studies revolving around racial disparities. I present a paper which examines conversations between police officers and white or black drivers. The paper was published in 2017 by the Department of Linguistics of the Stanford University. The data consists of 981 stops conducted by officers of the Oakland Police Department who wore body cameras. The footage was transcribed to obtain around 36,700 officer utterances for the analysis. The utterances were analyzed regarding the respectfulness of officers toward black and white drivers. Respect is one key element in interactions between officers and community members, and instead of citing a paper, I just go with life experiences. If someone is rude to you, you are probably less inclined to work with this person and help them. That's just common social behavior. This paper is subdivided into 3 studies. In Study 1, the utterances were rated by human participants. In Study 2, statistical models were developed based on Study 1 and various linguistic theories around respect, politeness, power, and social distance. In Study 3, these models were applied to all stops of the dataset. Contextual factors were also considered to narrow down the results. 414 utterances with 312 toward black and 102 toward white persons were randomly sampled. They were transcribed without any names, and each utterance was read by at least 10 participants. They rated the officers on a scale how respectful, polite, friendly, formal, and impartial they were in each conversation. Average ratings with confidence intervals were calculated. The officer utterances toward black persons were rated less respectful, polite, friendly, formal, and impartial than toward white persons. Considering age or sex did not change the disparities. Since these 5 perceptual categories overlap, they were summarized into 2 categories, named respect and formality. The used method is called principal-component analysis. If you are interested, I link 2 sources which are introductions to this method. The respect category contains positive values for the impartial, respectful, friendly, as well as polite dimension. So flippantly said, respect consists of these categories. The formality category contains a positive value for the formal and a negative value for the friendly dimension. This means friendly is not considered being part of behaving formal. If these categories are plotted, following diagram ensues. Officers are pretty similar in formality regarding white and black persons, but they are lower in respect regarding black persons. So the differences aren't due to the formality with which black persons were addressed, but the respect with which they were treated. The methods of Study 1 are not usable for nationwide examinations, since over 20 million traffic stops occur each year. Also, even with this smaller dataset, only 1.1% were examined, so conclusions had to be drawn with such a small sample size. Therefore, computational models for formality and respect were developed, which were applied to the full dataset. The models were tuned with the 414 utterances examined. The models were based on various studies which developed linguistic theories of respect. The utterances were divided into so-called linguistic features. For example, one feature was formal titles, like sir or miss. Another one was negations, like never or no. And as a last example, negative words like suspended or accuse. To each feature a weight was assigned for either model. For example, for the model of respect, apologizing and gratitude were weighted high since they are associated with respect. These features were used in linear regressions which predict the perceptual ratings of respect and formality from Study 1. These predicted ratings were close to the average, so by using these linguistic features, the models can replicate the rating process to some extent. One result of the regression are odds ratios. So the ratio of odds of those features occurring in officers' speech directed either toward whites or toward blacks. Bars on the right stand for utterances in conversations with predominantly white persons, and bars on the left with predominantly black persons. The future safety is way more often used in conversations with white persons, so for example, drive safely, and other expressions with safe. On the flip side, informal titles were more probable in conversations with black persons, so for example, man or body. Sentences can be scored with these weighted futures, like for example the following sentences. Can I see that driver's license again? It's showing suspended. That's you? There you go, ma'am. Drive safe, please. Alright, my man, do me a favor. Just keep your hands on the steering wheel real quick. It just says that, you fixed it. No problem. Thank you very much, sir. To describe every future takes too long, so I chose 3, namely speech disfluencies, filled pauses, and direct commands. These are potentially connected with an officer's comfort or anxiety. Disfluencies and direct commands are perceived as disrespectful and are found to be linked to anxiety. On the other hand, evidence suggests filled pauses are mindfully used for various purposes, like emphasizing a sentence. They are linked to comfort and are perceived as respectful. In this study, the interactions between officers and black or white persons were examined in terms of respect, while contextual factors were considered. The models of study 2 were used to examine the full dataset of circa 36,700 utterances. The factors considered were the driver's race, age and gender, officer race, occurrence of a search and the result of a stop. Some additional factors were included in some examinations, which I will mention. The referents were black male drivers and white officers. Considering these factors, utterances by officers to white drivers led to higher values compared to black drivers. The y-axis represents the score, and the x-axis represents the various variables. Higher respect scores were calculated toward older drivers, as well as when a citation was issued. On the flip side, respect was lower in stops where a search was conducted. A difference between officer racial groups was not found. To test whether officers were less respectful when stopping drivers for more severe offenses, an additional factor was considered. Officers ranked offenses on a severity scale. This did not lead to significant changes, therefore the severity can be dismissed. Other factors were interactions without arrest and searches, to limit the data to conversations with less charged circumstances. The results for race, age, and issued citations remain at a similar level. So even when the situation is not tense due to use of force, disparities persist. Now, how did the officer score regarding the formality category? It seems there is no correlation between race, but I have to note that this result is not statistically significant. But the factors age and gender did yield significant results, namely a higher value for both factors. Are the differences driven by a small percentage of officers? In this dataset, 90 officers had interactions with white and black drivers. The differences regarding respect across stops of both groups were plotted. For every officer racial group, an approximate normal distribution was found. If a small amount of officers were severely less respectful toward black drivers, there would have been a significant spike of high positive numbers. Another option to examine the dataset was the change of the scores across the whole conversation. For both driver groups, the respect score increases over time, but the increase is quicker in interactions with white drivers than with black drivers, and the discrepancy persists. The formality score of white drivers is slightly higher at the beginning of a conversation, but during the decrease the curves converge. So over time, both driver groups are addressed with similar formality, but black drivers are consistently treated with less respect. The authors found that white drivers are 57% more likely to be addressed with respectful utterances than black drivers, who are 61% more likely to hear one of the least respectful utterances. It is possible that the language and behavior of drivers is influencing the officer's language. However, Study 1 shows that even in the first 5% of an interaction, racial disparities are present. So even before the drivers can say much, they are already addressed differently if they are black. And when no arrest takes place or use of force is necessary, the drivers of different races are still not addressed the same. Body cameras are certainly useful to aggregate data, since surveys rely on recollection and researchers accompanying officers can lead to different behavior. And computational models can help with large datasets which are not reliant on a great amount of people rating interactions. On the other hand, the models have to be developed without introducing any bias and have to be checked for this. Body cameras can easily identify persons, so protecting privacy has to be a priority. Not necessarily in regard to the models as long as they are not modified to identify persons. But the surrounding data collection and preparation can violate privacy. In contrast to the papers presented before, this paper is rather a concept tested on a sample and lays the groundwork for tests on a large scale. Therefore, the conclusions drawn are certainly indicators for the Oakland Police Department. But I think it has to be scaled up even for this dataset. The number of 70 participants seems rather low, especially since only 10 saw one specific utterance. Also, only 1.1% of all utterances were examined in Study 1. And because Study 1 was necessary to build the model, I am not convinced that this is enough to achieve an actually robust model. Since I am a layman, I have not the qualification to criticize the methodology. I just wanted to point this out, but since it is peer-reviewed, yes, not the safest thing, but it is also not worthless, I still think it was worthwhile covering it. But research with larger datasets is definitely necessary, similar to the previously presented papers. Hereby I conclude my series about racial disparities concerning police stops. My next video is about the role of Switzerland in the Second World War, so I'll continue with controversial topics. Anyway, I wish you a magnificent day.